Comparable rentals in this school district run about $1,400 a month. You move in with a cognitively impaired woman. Nobody else has eyes on the situation. If you sign it this afternoon, the litigation stops immediately, the accusations stop, everything stops, and this family can begin to heal.
Gregory, if you are watching this, you are the one who is going to say it.
My name is Rachel Doyle. I am 41 years old, and exactly 4 hours after we lowered my mother into the ground at Oakdale Cemetery, my oldest brother slid a printed spreadsheet across her kitchen table and calmly informed me that I owed the family 72 months of back rent. He had printed it at the hotel business center that morning. He had folded it into 3 neat sections and carried it in the inside pocket of his charcoal funeral suit, through the service, through the hymn my mother had personally selected, through the part where I stood alone at the front of a Methodist church with my hands shaking violently, and read the 23rd Psalm because not a single one of my 3 brothers would do it. I did not scream. I did not throw the pan of scalloped potatoes sitting on the stove. I simply looked down at his little spreadsheet with its neat columns and its bolded total, and I smiled a small, cold smile, because I knew something about my mother's final wishes that none of them had bothered to ask about in 6 entire years, and it was going to obliterate every single one of them. Before I tell you exactly how I let my brothers walk into the most expensive mistake of their lives, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Hit that like button and subscribe. And if you have ever been the one who stayed while everyone else built a career and a family and a life somewhere far away, you are going to want to hear what happened next. The silence in that kitchen was absolutely deafening. My brother Gregory is 48 years old. He is a cardiologist in Denver, Colorado, and he has spent his entire adult life speaking to frightened families in a low, patient, deeply authoritative voice that makes people feel like the worst news in the world is being handled by a professional. He was using that exact voice on me. Comparable rentals in this school district run about $1,400 a month, Greg explained, tapping the paper twice with one finger. 6 years is 72 months. I am not saying we hold you to the entire amount, Rachel. I am saying it factors into the calculation. My brother Paul is 45. He is a mechanical engineer in Austin, Texas, married to a woman named Kimberly, who has openly disliked me since 2011. Paul stood at the coffee maker with his back turned to the entire conversation, refilling a mug he had not finished, because Paul has never in his life been in a room where something ugly was happening and actually looked at it. "Greg," Paul said quietly, "that was the whole thing. Not stop. Just a request for a lower volume. My youngest brother Dennis is 39. He lives 40 minutes away in Columbus. He has never held a job longer than 14 months. He has borrowed money from our mother every year since he was 22, and at that exact moment he was sitting at the dining room table looking at his phone." "Somebody has to say it out loud," Greg continued, setting his paper plate of funeral ham down on the counter beside the sink instead of in it. "The estate is the house. The house appraises at 310, maybe 320 in this market. There are 4 of us." He tapped the paper again. 4. There was still a foil pan of green bean casserole on my mother's stove with masking tape on the lid, so the church ladies would know whose dish to return. There was a post-it note stuck to her refrigerator in my own handwriting that read, "Diane Pills 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. set timer. Curling at the corners and gone yellow from 6 years of kitchen steam." There was a plastic hospital wristband in the drawer beside the sink that I had not yet found a way to throw in the garbage. My mother had been dead since Tuesday. It was Saturday. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it made something inside my chest go completely still. It was not rage. Rage came much later, and rage is honestly useless. What I felt in that kitchen was a quiet click, like a door shutting somewhere in a house at night, 3 rooms away, and you hear it and you understand that whatever was on the other side of that door is now permanently closed. "Okay," I said. Gregory actually blinked. He had the entire rest of his speech loaded and ready. I could see it sitting in his shoulders, the "let us all be reasonable here," the "nobody is the villain in this situation." He had rehearsed the whole thing against a version of his sister who fought back. "Okay? I heard you," I said. I picked his paper plate up off the counter. "I am going to start the dishwasher." And I turned my back on all three of them, and I ran the hot water, and behind me my brothers began discussing me in the specific tone people use when they believe the person cannot hear them, or when they have decided the person does not really count. 6 years before that afternoon, I lived in Chicago. I need to say that out loud exactly one time, because in the version of the story my family tells, that woman never existed. In their version, I have always simply been the one in Marysville, Ohio, with the post-it notes and the pill organizer, the way you assume a chair has always been in the corner of a room. But she existed. She was a marketing director at a mid-sized logistics firm on West Lake Street. She made $106,000 a year. She had an apartment in Ravenswood with an entire wall of records and a window that got afternoon light. And she had a boyfriend named Theo who cooked elaborate dinners on Sundays and hummed the entire time he did it. And she had a passport with actual stamps in it. The call that ended her did not come from a doctor. It came from Dolores Kirkland, who lived directly across the street on Willow Bend Drive and who had known my mother since 1987. "Honey," Dolores said, "your mom is standing in my driveway in her nightgown. This is the third time this month. She keeps asking me where Frank is." Frank was my father. He had been dead for 9 years. I called Gregory first, because Gregory is the doctor, and because in our family Gregory has always been the one you call first. He listened for approximately 90 seconds, and then delivered his assessment. That is consistent with early-stage dementia, possibly Alzheimer's. She needs a full neurological workup and a cognitive screen. A pause. "Can you get her in? Can you get her in?" I called Paul in Austin. Paul made a long, pained noise and said, "God, that is awful. That is just awful, Rachel. Let me talk to Kim about the calendar." I called Dennis, who lived 40 minutes away in Columbus, close enough to have driven over that same night. Dennis said, "You are better at that stuff than me." 4 days later, I filed for 2 weeks of paid time off, threw a duffel bag into my car, and drove east on Interstate 70 with the radio off. I told Theo it was 2 weeks. I genuinely believed it when I said it. Nobody ever chooses this. That is the part people fundamentally do not understand, and I include all three of my brothers in the word people. There is no crossroads. There is no single heroic moment where a woman stands in a doorway and nobly decides to lay her entire life down for her mother. There is only a series of small, obviously correct decisions, each one completely reasonable in isolation, and at the end of them you look up and you are 41 years old and you have not had a full night of sleep since the Obama administration. 2 weeks became 4 weeks because the neurologist could not see her until the 11th. 4 weeks became 8 because the home health aide cost $29 an hour and Medicare does not cover custodial care, which is a sentence I explained to my brothers approximately 40 separate times over 6 years, and which never once stuck to any of them. It went through them like water through a screen door. 8 weeks became a formal leave of absence. The leave of absence became a phone call with a very kind woman in human resources named Priya who told me, "Rachel, we can hold the role until March." March came. She did not hold the role. Why on earth would she? Theo lasted until the following August. He was not a villain, and I refused to make him one. He drove out twice. The second time he stood in the driveway on Willow Bend with his car keys already in his hand and said, "Just tell me what I am waiting for. Tell me, and I will wait for it." And I stood there in my mother's driveway and I could not answer him, because the only honest answer was my mother's death, and there is no way to say that out loud to a decent man standing in a driveway in August. So he left, and I stayed, and I picked up a part-time remote position writing marketing emails for a company that sells orthopedic dog beds 22 hours a week at $19 an hour, because that was the only thing on earth that fit around the schedule. The schedule. 6:40 in the morning, get her up and toileted before she wakes all the way. because if she wakes all the way first, she fights you. And my mother was 5'4" and built like a fence post and startlingly strong right up until the final year. Pills at 8, crushed into applesauce beginning in year 3 because she had started hiding them in her cheek and spitting them into the philodendron. Breakfast, which had to be precisely the same breakfast every single morning for 6 years, 1 egg over hard, 1 piece of toast cut on the diagonal, coffee with so much milk in it that it came out tan, cut the toast straight across instead of on the diagonal, and she would not eat it. Not one bite, not all day, no matter what I did. Nobody understands why. That is the disease. It picks a hill and it dies on that hill. The mornings were the good hours. In the mornings I got some of her back. She would tell me about working the line at the Scott's plant in the 70s, about the foreman everybody called Turtle, about how she and my father went to see The Sting on their second date, and he fell asleep halfway through, and she never once let him forget it for 31 years of marriage. The same stories, every single day. I could recite all of them from memory. I would pay real money to hear any one of them again. By 2 in the afternoon, she would begin hunting for things. Her mother's ring, a winter coat she had not owned since 1994. She would look for the children, wandering room to room asking where the kids were, and I would say, "The kids are grown, Mom. I am right here." And she would turn and look at me with a pleasant, polite confusion, the exact expression you give a helpful stranger who has just held a door for you. By 4:30 she was frightened. Every evening, without exception, she would decide that the house belonged to somebody else and that I was deliberately preventing her from going home. She was standing inside her own home, the home my father put a back addition on with his own 2 hands in 1988, and there is no version of that conversation that ends well. So somewhere in year 2 I stopped arguing and started saying, "The roads are bad tonight. We will go first thing in the morning." And she would nod, relieved. And 9 minutes later we would do the entire thing again. 9, 10, 11 times between 4:30 and bedtime, every night, for years. And then there were the nights. She wandered. That is the part that genuinely takes a person apart, and it is not the labor, it is the vigilance. I installed a chime on the front door. I slept with a baby monitor beside my pillow. In 6 years, I did not sleep more than 4 consecutive hours a single time, and I need you to understand what that actually does to a human being, because I do not think it is understood at all. It is not tiredness. Tiredness is a rough Tuesday. This was a slow, quiet dismantling. I lost the ability to follow the plot of a television show. I once stood in the Kroger on Delaware Avenue holding a can of green beans and lost 9 full minutes of my life. And through all of it, over 6 entire years, my 3 brothers visited our mother a combined total of 4 times. Dennis came once, in year 1, and stayed 2 nights and left early because, and I am quoting him exactly, "The vibe in here is heavy." Paul came twice, Christmas of year 2 with the kids, and 1 afternoon in year 5. Both times they stayed at the Hampton Inn out by the highway. Kimberly stood in my mother's kitchen holding a glass of wine and told me, "I could never do what you do. I am just not built for it," in the exact tone people use when what they actually mean is, "and thank God for that." And Gregory, the cardiologist, the firstborn, the golden son, came exactly 1 time in 6 years. He arrived at 10:41 in the morning, and he was gone by 4:52 that same afternoon. He examined our mother the way you would examine a case study, corrected her neurologist's dosing over the phone in a manner that was probably medically correct and absolutely humiliating for everyone in the room, and then he stood in the driveway and told me I should really look into memory care facilities. I told him memory care runs $7,000 a month, and our mother had $41,000 in this house. He said, "There is always Medicaid." I said, "Medicaid takes the house, Greg." That is the entire point of the spend down. They put a lien on it, and when she dies, they take it. And my brother, a board-certified physician, a man who reads medical literature for a living, looked at me and said, "Huh." I know the exact number of visits and I know the exact timestamps because in year 2, after a delivery driver left the storm door standing open and my mother made it all the way to the corner of Willow Bend and Sycamore in December wearing nothing but socks, Dolores Kirkland's son came over and installed a camera above the front door. That camera kept a log. It kept a log of absolutely everything for 6 straight years, and it was still keeping one on the afternoon my brothers walked into that kitchen with a spreadsheet. I finished the dishes. I stood at my mother's sink and washed the church ladies' casserole dishes so they could go back to the church ladies with the masking tape still stuck to the lids, and behind me in the dining room my 3 brothers divided my life into quarters. I heard fragments. She has been living here rent-free. She has not held a real job since 2018. Kim looked it up. In Ohio, if there is no will, it splits evenly. It is automatic. It is just the law. And I stood there with my hands in the scalding water, and I thought about that last part very carefully. If there is no will, they did not know. 6 years, and not one of my brothers had ever asked me a single question about the legal or financial structure of our mother's life. Not one. They had never asked who held her power of attorney. They had never asked how the property taxes got paid, or who filed her tax returns, or what happened in March of year 5 when she fell in the bathroom and spent 9 days at Memorial Hospital while I slept upright in a vinyl chair. They never asked, because asking would have required knowing, and knowing would have required owing. Gregory came in and stood beside me at the sink. "I do not want this to get ugly," he said. "Neither do I." Because I have already spoken to somebody, a probate attorney in Columbus, just to understand the landscape. He said it lightly, casually, the way a man sets a loaded gun down on a table and calls it a paperweight. "Rachel, I want you to think honestly about how this looks from the outside. You move in with a cognitively impaired woman. Nobody else has eyes on the situation. 6 years go by." He shrugged. "I know you. I am not saying you did anything wrong. I am saying it looks a certain way, and if this ends up in front of a judge, that is what a judge is going to see." I shut the water off. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven door, the one with the rooster on it that had hung on that exact handle since I was in the 7th grade. Then I looked directly at my brother and I smiled. Because Gregory Doyle, who had visited our mother one single time in 6 years, who had been in that house for 11 minutes before producing a spreadsheet, had no idea that on the 17th of March 2018, our mother had made an appointment on her own, in her own name, without telling any of us why. He did not know about the drive to Dublin, Ohio. He did not know about the office with the fish tank in the waiting room. And he absolutely did not know about the last 5 minutes of that appointment, when a 63-year-old attorney set up a camera on a tripod and asked my mother a question, and my mother looked directly into that lens and answered it. The letter arrived 11 days later, and it arrived certified, which meant a man in a United States Postal Service windbreaker stood on my dead mother's front porch and watched me sign my own name on a little plastic screen while the storm door banged against my hip in the November wind. The letterhead belonged to Halloran, Voss and Bright, a probate litigation firm out of Columbus. I read the entire thing standing up in the front hallway, directly beside the coat rack where my mother's winter coat was still hanging, because I had not yet been able to decide what a person is supposed to do with a dead woman's coat. It was 4 pages long, and it was written in that specific cold, clinical language attorneys use to make a devastating accusation sound like a weather report. The firm represented Gregory, Paul, and Dennis Doyle. It demanded a complete accounting of every single financial transaction I had conducted on my mother's behalf since 2018. It demanded every healthcare directive, every power of attorney, and any and all documents purporting to convey an interest in the real property located at 4412 Willow Bend Drive. It gave me 14 days, and buried in the 3rd paragraph, in a sentence so smooth and polished you could have skated across it, my 3 brothers formally accused me of deliberately isolating our dying mother from her own family in order to steal her house out from underneath them. At the very bottom, In the little closing paragraph, attorneys always write specifically so that the entire thing reads like a casual shrug, was a single sentence stating that their clients wished to resolve this matter amicably within the family and remained open to a negotiated distribution. A negotiated distribution. 4 ways. I sat down heavily on the second stair with that letter resting in my lap, and I laughed out loud, and the laugh came out completely wrong, more like a cough, and then I did the exact thing I had promised myself I would never do again inside that house, which is cry alone on the staircase in the dark. And I want to be extremely clear about which word broke me, because it was not the accusation of theft. Theft I could survive. Theft was almost a compliment. It was the word isolated. Because sit with what that word actually means when 3 men living in Denver and Austin and Columbus put it into a legal document. It means the reason Gregory Doyle visited his dying mother one single time in 6 years was me. It means the reason Paul slept at the Hampton Inn out by the highway instead of in his childhood bedroom was me. It means the reason Dennis, who lived a 40-minute drive down Interstate 71, could not manage that drive more than once in 6 entire years was his cruel and manipulative older sister standing guard at the door with her arms crossed, keeping a loving family apart. They had taken the single largest moral failure of their entire adult lives, and with the help of a very expensive law firm, they had legally assigned all of it to me. That was the moment I understood exactly what kind of war this was going to be, because an outright lie you can disprove. A lie is practically a gift, because a lie has a seam in it and you can get your fingernail underneath that seam and tear the whole thing open in front of everybody. What my brothers were building was infinitely more dangerous than a lie. They were building a story assembled entirely out of true facts arranged in exactly the wrong order. I did not sleep for the next 72 hours. I would love to tell you that I went cold and strategic immediately, that I became some kind of ruthless calculating machine the second I put that letter down, but that is not what happened. What happened is that I entered something very close to a fever. I sat at my mother's dining room table, the one with the curling iron burn in the veneer from 1994, with my laptop open and a yellow legal pad beside it, and I began building a timeline of 6 years, not because anybody had told me to, but because I could not do anything else with my hands. 6 years of bank statements. Every single check I had ever written on her account and precisely what it had been for. Every property tax bill. The furnace that died in January of 2021, $4,200, paid entirely out of my own personal savings because her checking account had $1,100 in it that month, and it was 9 degrees outside. The wheelchair ramp, the grab bars in the shower, the stair lift I bought used off a woman in Springfield whose husband had just died, $300 in cash, which I drove out and picked up in a rented van, and the 2 of us stood in her garage and cried together for 4 solid minutes, complete strangers. And then, at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd night, I opened the camera logs. I had never once looked at all of them at the same time. Dolores Kirkland's son had mounted that camera above the front door in year 2, after a delivery driver left the storm door standing open, and my mother made it all the way to the corner of Willow Bend and Sycamore in December, wearing nothing on her feet but socks. It had been recording ever since. 6 years of visitors, compressed into a single spreadsheet with timestamps, and it was the most quietly devastating document I have ever read in my life. Gregory Doyle of Denver, Colorado. 1 visit. June of 2022. Arrived at 10:41 in the morning and departed at 4:52 that same afternoon. Paul Doyle of Austin, Texas. 2 visits. Christmas of 2020, 2 days, both nights at the Hampton Inn. 1 afternoon in August of 2023. Dennis Doyle of Columbus, Ohio, 40 minutes away. 1 visit. February of 2019. 2 nights, and he left the second morning because the vibe in the house was heavy. 4 visits, 6 years, 3 sons, and on that exact same log, in that exact same 6-year window, Dolores Kirkland from directly across the street appeared 431 separate times. The rotating home health aides appeared hundreds of times. The pharmacy delivery boy from Miller's Drug, who was maybe 19 years old and who always called me Miss Rachel, appeared more often than all three of my brothers combined. And a hospice nurse named Yvonne came 3 times a week for the final 5 months of my mother's life, held her hand while she was actively dying, and wept openly at her funeral, which is something not a single one of my brothers managed to do. Then I found the text message, and the text message is the part that still makes my hands go cold. June of 2022, 4 days after Gregory's one and only visit, 4 days after he stood in that driveway and told me I should really look into memory care facilities. He had written to me asking that going forward I loop him in by email rather than by telephone, because Denver was 2 hours behind and his on-call schedule was brutal, and email simply worked better for him. And I had said okay. Of course I had said okay. He was a doctor. He was busy. I was pathetically, humiliatingly grateful that he had come at all. For the next 3.5 years, I sent that man carefully written emails documenting his own mother's decline, and I received responses to roughly 1 in every 6 of them. He built that wall himself, brick by brick. He put the request down in writing, in a text message, with a permanent timestamp attached to it, and then he hired a litigation firm in Columbus to stand in front of an Ohio judge and argue that his sister had isolated their mother from him. I sat in that dark dining room with my head down on the table, and I finally understood something that I believe is the actual black beating heart of this entire story, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with money or houses or property values. My brothers did not need to believe that I was a thief. They needed a reason not to look directly at the 6 years they had refused to show up for, and I was that reason. I was, for every single one of them, a far easier thing to look at than themselves. 2 days later, I drove 45 minutes to Dublin, Ohio, to an office park with a fish tank in the waiting room and a bowl of butterscotch candies on the reception desk and the specific carpet smell of a suite that has not been renovated since 1997. Constance Whitaker was 69 years old, white-haired, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she carried herself with the settled, unbothered air of a woman who has been professionally underestimated for 4 straight decades and stopped finding it interesting sometime around 1998. She read the letter in 90 seconds flat, and then she told me, very calmly, exactly what was about to happen to me. She explained that virtually none of these cases are ever decided on the merits. They are decided on money. The house was worth $312,000. 2 years of estate litigation would cost somewhere between $80,000 and $140,000, and every dollar of it would come out of the estate, which meant it would come out of the house, which meant everybody would lose and the attorneys would eat extraordinarily well. That was my brother's entire strategy, and it was not a bad one. They did not need to win. They only needed me to run out of money before they did. Then she asked me how I was currently paying the property taxes. I told her I was paying them out of my own pocket. She asked how much was in my pocket. I told her the number, and it was $9,400, and Constance Whitaker looked at me over the top of her glasses for a very long time without saying anything at all. Then she told me what we were not going to do. We were not going to write my brothers a beautiful, devastating letter containing everything my mother had done. I argued with her about it. I wanted to end it that afternoon. I wanted to drop the whole file on Gregory's head from a great height and watch him fold. She would not allow it. She explained that if we showed our hand now, their attorney would read the file, immediately advise them to withdraw quietly, and my brothers would offer me a stiff little apology over the telephone. And every single thing they had already said about me would remain exactly where it was, out in the world, permanently, uncorrected, forever. Then she asked me what I actually wanted out of this, and she told me not to say the house. And I heard my own voice say something that genuinely startled me. I said that I wanted them to have to say all of it out loud, in front of everybody, and then I wanted them to find out. Constance nodded very slowly and said that in that case, we would wait, and we would let them commit. They committed on a Thursday. It was Paul who did it, and using Paul was strategically brilliant of them, because Paul is the soft one. Paul is the one who makes the pained face and never raises his voice, and a knife sounds completely different coming from the sad brother than it does from the angry one. He posted it publicly on Facebook with no privacy settings whatsoever, attached to a photograph of our mother from 2009 at Dennis's wedding, laughing, wearing the coral dress she loved. I have gone back and forth for weeks about whether to write this. Our family has always been a private family, but my mother deserves better than silence. Some of you know that Mom spent her final years with dementia. What most of you do not know is that during those years, she became isolated from her 3 sons. Our calls went unreturned. Our visits were always bad timing. We were told over and over that she was having a hard week. We have now learned that during that same period, documents were signed transferring her home, the home our father built the back addition onto with his own 2 hands, into the name of one single person. I am not going to name anybody. That is not who I am. That is not how we were raised. I am simply asking anyone who loved Diane Doyle to keep her in your prayers, hug your parents, and please, check on them once in a while, because you never know who is in the room when the paperwork comes out. 311 reactions. I know the precise number because I refreshed that post for 4 consecutive hours like a woman picking at a scab until it finally bleeds. And I need you to read it one more time and notice exactly what my brother did because it is a genuine masterpiece of cruelty. There is not one single factual lie in the entire post, not one sentence I could point at and prove false. Calls did go unreturned by them. Visits were bad timing, precisely twice in 6 years, both times because our mother had fallen and was lying in a hospital bed. Documents were signed, a home was transferred. I am not going to name anybody, he wrote, to 180 mutual friends, 40 of whom were blood relatives, every single one of whom knew perfectly well that Diane Doyle had exactly 1 daughter. The comments came in like water through a broken levee, strangers praying for the family, a man from Kentucky announcing that this happens far more than people realize and that Paul should lawyer up immediately. A woman with 3 crying emojis saying she had no idea, that Diane had always spoken so highly of all of her children, and one cousin who began to type out a question and got quietly private messaged before she could finish it. By Saturday, I had been silently removed from 2 separate family group chats. By Sunday, Dolores Kirkland stood in her driveway across the street with her arms crossed, absolutely shaking with fury on my behalf, and told me that a woman had stopped her in the Kroger on Delaware Avenue to ask, in a low and deeply sympathetic voice, whether it was true that Rachel Doyle had a lawyer come to the house. 2 weeks after that, I walked into that same Kroger, and a woman I have known since I was 9 years old spotted me at the end of the produce aisle, and she turned her cart around and went back the way she came. She turned her shopping cart around, in the town where I was born, to avoid walking past me. Constance had warned me that my brothers needed me to run out of money. She was only half right. They needed me to run out of money, and they needed this entire town to have already made up its mind about exactly who I was before any of it was finished. Because that part does not get repaired by a court order. There is no ruling on this earth that unwrites a Facebook post. But the phone call that actually broke me came on a Tuesday night in early December, and it came from my Aunt Bernice. Bernie was my mother's older sister, 79 years old, and you need to understand who this woman is, because it matters enormously. Bernie spent 4 years nursing their mother in a back bedroom in Bellefontaine, Ohio, 4 years of bedpans and crushed pills and no sleep and no help. And when the old woman finally died, the estate split 5 ways, and Bernie received 1/5 and a great many warm thank yous from siblings who had not lifted a single finger, and it made her quietly bitter for the next 30 years, and every member of our family knew that story by heart. Aunt Bernie was the one human being on this earth who was going to understand. She asked me, very gently, whether I had made my mother sign a paper. And I talked far too fast and said far too much, the way you always do when you are innocent and terrified. I told her our mother had set it up herself. I told her our mother had brought it up over breakfast, made the appointment on her own, and said out loud that she was not going to do to me what Grandma had done to Bernie. I told her our mother had used her name. Bernie told me not to dare use her for that. Then she explained, in a voice that had gone soft and pitying, which was infinitely worse than anger, that my mother could not possibly have known what she was signing, because Bernie had seen her at Easter that year, and my mother had looked directly across the table and called her Doris. I told her the paper had been signed in March of 2018, and the Easter she was describing was in 2021. I told her that was 3 years apart, that my mother had been an entirely different woman by then, that she had seen her one single time in 3 years for 2 hours at a dinner table, and was now preparing to sign her name to a legal document about what she had witnessed. And my Aunt Bernice, 79 years old, who had nursed her own mother for 4 years and received 1/5 and a great many thank yous, said this to me very quietly. She said, "Well, somebody should have called me more." Then she hung up the telephone. I stood in that kitchen for a long time afterward. Then I slid down onto the floor with my back against the dishwasher, in the exact spot where I used to sit at 2 in the morning listening to the baby monitor, and I let all of it come. And when it was finished, I was a different woman. Because I finally understood that not one of these people actually needed evidence. Not Bernie, not the woman with the shopping cart, not 311 strangers on the internet. What they needed was a story in which nothing that had happened was anybody's fault except one woman's, and I had been elected to that role unanimously and in absentia. Fine. If my family wanted a villain, my family could have one. I called Constance at 8:04 the following morning and told her Bernie was giving them an affidavit. She said she had assumed as much, because family always does. Then she told me they had filed that same morning, contest plus a motion to freeze the property, and that there was one more thing I needed to know, and that she wanted me sitting down for it. Gregory had telephoned her directly the previous afternoon. Physician to professional, he called it, one caretaker to another, and he had wanted her to be aware that if this matter proceeded to trial, they would be asking the court to examine whether our mother's medications had been properly administered. My brother, the cardiologist, was going to stand in an Ohio courtroom and make a judge wonder whether I had hurt her. Constance told me, gently, that this was the exact point where people take the settlement. 25%. Walk away. Finished by February. Nobody on this earth would blame me. I stood in my mother's kitchen and looked at the refrigerator, at the yellowed post-it note curling at the corner in my own handwriting, 6 years old, telling me when the pills went in, and I asked Constance one single question. I asked her whether my brothers had requested the video. There was a pause on that line that lasted 8 full seconds, and then, for the first time since the letter arrived, I heard Constance Whitaker smile. They had asked her for documents, she said, every document in the file, but in 11 days, not one of them had ever thought to ask her about a video file. The invitation to my own execution arrived 9 days before Christmas, and it came in the form of a group text message that my brother Gregory sent to 14 separate people, only one of whom was me. He called it a family meeting. He wrote that given everything that had happened, and given how much pain this situation had caused so many people who loved Diane, it was time for the family to sit down together in one room, without attorneys, and find a path forward that honored our mother's memory. He proposed the following Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock at Aunt Bernie's house in Bellefontaine, because Bernie was the eldest surviving member of the family, and it felt right to do this under her roof. Then he added one final line, and that final line is the reason I said yes. He wrote that he hoped Rachel would come, but that the family would need to move forward with or without her participation. I read that message probably 40 times. And every single time I read it, I admired it a little more, the way you might admire a very well-constructed trap that has been laid specifically for you. Because understand exactly what my brother had built. He had not invited me to a negotiation. He had invited 11 relatives to watch a verdict get delivered. He had chosen Bernie's house so that the eldest woman in our family would be sitting in the room lending her weight to it. He had chosen a Sunday afternoon in December so that everybody would already be in a soft, sentimental Christmas mood about family and forgiveness, and he had chosen the phrase "without attorneys" so that when I inevitably arrived alone and unprepared and emotional, there would be nobody in that house whose job it was to protect me. He was going to put me in a chair in my aunt's living room in front of every relative I had left on this earth, and he was going to walk them all slowly through the story of a lonely, unemployed woman who moved in with a dying mother and came out the other side owning a house. And then he was going to slide a piece of paper across the coffee table, and 11 people were going to look at me, and there is not one human being alive who can survive that. I called Constance Whitaker at 8 the next morning and told her about the meeting. She told me, immediately and firmly, that I should not go. She said that anything I said in that room would eventually make its way into an affidavit, that Gregory would be recording it whether he admitted it or not, and that there was no possible upside for me in a room where every single person had already made up their mind. I told her I understood all of that completely. Then I asked her to send me the video file. There was a very long pause on the line, and then that woman, who had been practicing elder law in Central Ohio since 1989 and had watched this exact movie play out more times than she could count, asked me one question. She asked whether I understood that once I did this, there would be no walking any of it back, that there would be no quiet settlement afterward, no stiff apology on the telephone, no awkward Thanksgiving in 4 years where everybody agrees not to bring it up. I told her that I did. She said the file would be in my inbox within the hour, and then she said one more thing before she hung up, and I have thought about it many times since. She said that in 34 years, she had never once seen a family survive the truth. She said the ones who survive are the ones who settle in the dark. I drove to Bellefontaine that Sunday, and I arrived at 20 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, which was 40 minutes before anybody expected me, and that timing was entirely deliberate. In the back of my mother's Buick, I had a portable projector I had purchased for $230, which was money I did not have, and a folding tripod screen, and a laptop, and a long orange extension cord. Aunt Bernie answered her own front door, and her entire face collapsed when she saw me standing on her porch, because I do not think that woman had genuinely expected me to come. She looked at the equipment in my arms, and she asked me what all of that was. I told her it was for the meeting. I told her Gregory had said this was about honoring Mom's memory, and that I had brought something of Mom's. And here is the thing about my Aunt Bernice, and it is the reason I have never been able to fully hate her. She stepped back and she let me in. She let me set up a projector in her own living room, aimed at the blank cream-colored wall above her sofa, because 79 years of Midwestern manners will beat almost anything, including a signed affidavit. I plugged the extension cord into the outlet behind her recliner. I unfolded the tripod screen and then folded it back up and leaned it against the wall, out of the way, because the wall itself was better. I tested the focus. I set the laptop on Bernie's coffee table beside a bowl of red and green foil-wrapped chocolates, and I closed the lid, and I sat down in the corner armchair with my coat still on, and I waited. They began arriving at 10 minutes to 2. Cousin Tammy and her husband, my mother's cousin Rick Vernon and his wife Sharon, who is the woman who turned her shopping cart around in the Kroger, 2 of Bernie's grown children. A neighbor of Bernie's who I am fairly certain has no biological relationship to anybody in that room and who came anyway. Paul, who flew in from Austin and who could not look at me and who sat down on the far end of the sofa and immediately took out his phone. Dennis, who arrived 19 minutes late with a gas station coffee. And Gregory, who arrived at exactly 2 o'clock in a quarter-zip sweater, carrying a leather folio. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the projector. I watched my brother's face do something I had never seen it do in 41 years of knowing him. For about a second and a half, Gregory Doyle did not know what he was looking at, and he did not know what to do, and he had no patient voice available for it. Then he recovered, because he always recovers, and he smiled and said hello to me, and he asked what the equipment was for. I told him it was for later. He sat down in the middle of the sofa. He opened his leather folio, and then my oldest brother did exactly what I had known he would do, which is that he began to speak, and he spoke for 19 uninterrupted minutes. He was extraordinary. I want to give him that. If you had walked into that living room knowing nothing about our family, you would have walked out believing every word. He began with grief. He talked about how hard the last 6 years had been on all of them, watching their mother disappear from 2,000 miles away, feeling helpless, feeling shut out. He talked about the guilt of being a physician who could not fix his own mother. He got slightly choked up and he had to pause, and Sharon Vernon made a small sympathetic noise from the love seat. Then he moved, very smoothly, into isolation. He explained that calls had gone unreturned and visits had been discouraged. He explained that he had begged for information and received almost nothing. He said, and I am quoting him precisely because I have never forgotten it, that he had spent 6 years feeling like a stranger who had to request permission to know how his own mother was doing. Then he moved to the house. He explained that in the spring of 2018, at a point when their mother was already cognitively compromised, documents had been executed transferring the entire property at 4412 Willow Bend Drive to one person. He said he was not accusing anybody of anything criminal. He said he was quite certain that his sister had convinced herself she had earned it. He said that was actually what made it so painful, that he did not believe I was a bad person. He believed I was an exhausted person who had made a decision in a fog. And then he slid a document out of his leather folio and set it down on Bernie's coffee table beside the bowl of chocolates. A voluntary disclaimer of interest, 4 equal shares. He said that if I signed it that afternoon, the litigation stopped immediately, the accusations stopped, everything stopped, and this family could begin to heal. 11 people turned and looked at me. That is the part I want you to sit with. 11 faces in a warm living room 9 days before Christmas, and every one of them was full of a kind of gentle pity that was so much worse than hatred. Tammy would not meet my eyes. Rick Vernon shook his head slowly at the floor. Bernie sat in her own recliner with her hands folded in her lap and her chin down. I stood up. I told them all that I would sign it. The relief that went through that room was genuinely physical. Paul finally looked up from his phone. Gregory exhaled and sat back against the cushions and allowed himself a small nod, and I watched my brother in that instant believe, completely, that he had won. Then I told them that before I signed anything, I wanted to show them something, and that it would take about 4 minutes, and that I thought Mom would have wanted them to see it. Nobody in that room could say no to that sentence. That is the entire reason I chose those words. I walked over to Bernie's coffee table and I opened the laptop, and the projector threw a rectangle of white light onto that cream-colored wall above the sofa, directly over my brother's head, and Gregory had to physically turn around in his seat to look at it. The first thing I put on that wall was a spreadsheet. I told them it was a visitor log from the camera above my mother's front door, installed in December of year 2, after she got out of the house in her socks and made it to the corner of Willow Bend and Sycamore. I told them the camera recorded every arrival at that door for 6 years, with timestamps, and that I had not created the log, the camera company had. Then I read it out loud into that living room. Gregory Doyle, 1 visit, June 2022, arrived 10:41 a.m., departed 4:52 p.m. Paul Doyle, 2 visits, Christmas 2020, 2 days, both nights at the Hampton Inn, and 1 afternoon in August 2023. Dennis Doyle, 40 minutes away in Columbus, 1 visit, February 2019, 2 nights. And then I read the other column, Dolores Kirkland, from across the street, 431 entries, home health aides, 600 and some, the delivery boy from Miller's Drug, Yvonne the hospice nurse, 3 times a week for the last 5 months of my mother's life. Nobody in that room made a sound. Rick Vernon put his coffee cup down on Bernie's side table very slowly, as though he had suddenly become aware of the noise it might make. Then I changed the slide, and I put my brother's text message from June of 2022 up on that wall in a font approximately 4 inches tall. I let them read it. I did not narrate it. I simply let 11 people sit in a living room and read the words in which Gregory Doyle, 4 days after his only visit in 6 years, personally requested in writing that his sister stop calling him and communicate by email instead, because Denver was 2 hours behind and his schedule was brutal. I told them that I honored that request for 3.5 years, and that he answered roughly 1 in every 6 of those emails, and that in the letter his attorney sent me last month, that arrangement is called isolation. My brother said my name, just my name, and then I said the sentence I had driven 51 minutes to say, and I said it very quietly, because there was no need at all to raise my voice. I said that Greg had told everyone that Mom did not know what she was signing in March of 2018, and that this was a very serious accusation to make about a woman who was no longer here to answer it, and that since he had made it in front of the whole family, it seemed only fair that Mom get to answer it in front of the whole family too. Then I hit the space bar, and my mother appeared on Aunt Bernie's living room wall, 6 feet tall, in the blue cardigan she wore that entire winter, sitting in a chair in a law office in Dublin, Ohio, on the 17th of March 2018, with a paper shamrock taped to the wall behind her head. Sharon Vernon made a sound like she had been struck. Bernie put her hand over her mouth and left it there for the next 4 minutes. And my mother, alive and irritable and completely herself, looked directly into that camera and began to speak. The first thing my mother did on that wall was complain about the chair. That is the detail that finished them, and I want to be honest and admit that I did not plan it. She shifted her weight and muttered that the chair was too low and asked somebody off camera if there was a cushion, and Constance Whitaker's voice came from behind the lens saying she would get one, and my mother waved her off and said, never mind, let us just do it. 11 people sat in Aunt Bernie's living room and heard Diane Doyle be annoyed about a chair. And that one small, ordinary human moment did more damage to my brother's case than every document in my possession, because you cannot fake that, and every single person in that room knew her well enough to know it. Then Constance asked her to state her name and today's date and where she was. My mother said her name was Diane Marie Doyle, that it was St. Patrick's Day, that she had 4 children, that her husband Frank died in 2009, and that she was in an office in Dublin because she had made an appointment 3 weeks ago to fix something before she could not fix it anymore. Then Constance asked her the question, and the question was this. She asked my mother whether anybody had told her to come here today, and my mother laughed. She actually laughed on that wall, 6 feet tall, in her blue cardigan, and she said that nobody tells her anything, that she made the call herself, that she looked the office up in the phone book, and that Rachel was sitting out in the waiting room right now doing a crossword puzzle because she had not been allowed in. Constance asked her why not, and my mother said, because this is mine. Then she talked for 4 minutes and 11 seconds without being asked another question. She said she was sick and she knew what she had, because Dr. Rahimi down the hall had told her that morning in plain English, and she had made him say it twice. She said she had watched her own mother go the same way, and she knew what was coming, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She said the house was worth about $280 at that time, and that it was the only thing she had left in the world besides $41,000 in a credit union account. Then she said that her daughter had quit a job in Chicago and driven out here in October and had not gone home. She said that she had 4 children and that she was going to say something out loud that she had never said out loud before, which is that she had spent most of her life favoring her sons, and that she knew she had done it, and that she had done it anyway, and that she had done it because that is how she was raised, and because the boys were easier to be proud of. She said Rachel was the one who worked for everything, and that she had told her so once as a compliment, years ago, and had figured out about 10 years too late that it had probably landed like an insult. And then she said the part that made my Aunt Bernice put her hand over her mouth. She said, I watched what my mother did to Bernie. I watched Bernie carry that woman for 4 years in a back bedroom, and then I watched 5 of us split it even and call it fair, and I have thought about that every year of my life since, and I am not doing it to Rachel. She said if my boys want to come and do the work, they can come and do the work, and the arrangement changes the same day. She said they are not going to come. She said, and I want it on this tape that I said it, they are not going to come. Then Constance asked her one final question. She asked whether my mother understood that after she was gone, somebody might say that she had been confused on this day, or that somebody had put her up to this. And my mother looked directly into that camera and said, "Well, that is exactly why we are doing this, isn't it?" Then she said, "Gregory, if you are watching this, you are the one who is going to say it. You have always been the one who says it." And then the file ended, and the wall went white, and the room stayed absolutely silent for 11 full seconds, which does not sound like a long time until you have to sit through it. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Aunt Bernie was crying without any sound at all, which is the way women of that generation cry, and Sharon Vernon was staring at the floor, and my cousin Tammy had both hands pressed flat against her own mouth. And then it broke, and it did not break the way I expected it to. It broke because Rick Vernon, who is 66 years old, and who had shared that Facebook post, and who had told his own wife to lawyer up, stood up out of Bernie's love seat and turned around and looked at my brother and asked him one question. He asked him whether he had known about the tape. Gregory said no, and Rick asked him whether he had ever asked, whether in 11 weeks of paying a Columbus law firm to accuse his sister of stealing from a dying woman, he had ever once picked up a phone and called the attorney who wrote the document and asked her what happened in that room. And my brother did not answer. That was the moment the room turned, and I want to be clear that it did not turn because I convinced anybody of anything. It turned because 11 people had just watched a dead woman predict, on camera, in 2018, exactly what her oldest son would do in 2024, and then watched him do it. Dennis got up and walked out through the kitchen and stood in Aunt Bernie's backyard in the cold for the remainder of the afternoon. Paul cried. He cried the way men cry when they have been caught, which is mostly about themselves, and he kept saying that he had not written that post, that Kim had helped him with it, that he had not meant it the way it came out. He said the word isolated had come from the lawyer. He said he had not even known what it meant when he read it. And Gregory did the thing that I will remember for the rest of my life. My brother, the cardiologist, the firstborn, the one who tells frightened families the worst news in the world, in a low, patient, authoritative voice, sat on Aunt Bernie's sofa in a quarter-zip sweater and asked me, very reasonably, whether the video had been edited. That is what he had left. I told him that Constance Whitaker had the original file, the metadata, the signed capacity evaluation from Dr. Rahimi taken that same morning, 2 disinterested witnesses, and a notary, and that his attorney was welcome to all of it, and that if he wanted to accuse a 69-year-old elder law attorney of fabricating evidence, he should absolutely do that in writing. Then I picked up the disclaimer of interest off the coffee table, the one he had brought for me to sign, and I folded it in half and I put it in my coat pocket, and I told him I would keep it as a souvenir. And then I unplugged the extension cord, and I packed up the projector, and 11 relatives sat in that living room and watched me carry it out to the car by myself, and not one of them offered to help, and I have thought about that too. They withdrew the contest 16 days later, on the 2nd of January. There was no hearing and no ruling and no dramatic moment in a courtroom, because that is not how these things actually end. Their attorney sent Constance a 2-paragraph letter stating that his clients had elected not to pursue the matter further. That was it. That was the whole thing. 11 weeks of my life, $9,400 reduced to $2,200, and it ended in 2 paragraphs from a man I never met. Gregory called me in February. I did not answer, and he left a voicemail that was 4 minutes and 40 seconds long, and I have never listened past the first 30 seconds of it. What I heard in those 30 seconds was that he wanted me to understand the position he had been in, and that is where I stopped. Paul mailed me a card in March, a real card, in an envelope with a stamp. He wrote that he was sorry, and that he had taken the post down, and that he thought about the video every day. He did not ask for anything. I have not written back yet. I might. Dennis texts me occasionally. Small things. A photograph of the Scott's plant. Once a picture of a rerun of The Sting that was on television, with no message attached. Aunt Bernie called me in April and asked if she could come see the house. She sat in my mother's kitchen for 2 hours, and we did not talk about the affidavit even once. And when she left, she stood in the driveway and told me that she had been so angry for 30 years that when the chance came to be angry at somebody standing right in front of her, she took it. I told her I understood. I do not know if I forgave her. Those are two different things, and I have learned to stop pretending they are the same one. Here is what nobody tells you about winning. I won. I own the house at 4412 Willow Bend Drive, free and clear. The property taxes are paid. The furnace is 4 years old. I sleep in my mother's room now because it gets better light, and last spring I finally did something with her winter coat, which is that I gave it to Yvonne, the hospice nurse, because Yvonne admired it once in 2023, and my mother heard her and said take it, and neither of them ever followed up. And in June, on the first anniversary, I turned 42, and 11 people who had been in Aunt Bernie's living room that Sunday now know exactly what happened, and 4 of them still do not speak to me. Because it turns out that being proven right in front of your entire family does not make people love you. It makes them uncomfortable. There are relatives of mine who liked me a great deal more when they thought I was a thief, because a thief is a simple thing to be, and what I actually am is a permanent standing reminder that 11 people sat in a warm living room 9 days before Christmas and had already decided about a woman before she opened her mouth. Sharon Vernon has apologized to me twice. She apologizes every single time she sees me now, in the Kroger on Delaware Avenue, in the same produce aisle, and I have started going to the Meijer instead. I got a job in September. Marketing manager at a hospital system in Dublin, 40 minutes each way, $68,000 a year, which is a great deal less than 106, but which is mine. My first week, a woman on my team asked me what I had been doing before, and I said I was a caregiver for 6 years, and she said, "Oh, so you took a break?" I said yes. Because there is no answer. I have tried to build one, and there is not one. The house is very quiet now. That is the thing I was not prepared for. I spent 6 years praying for quiet, and I got it. All of it. All at once. And for the first 4 months, I kept the television on in an empty room just to have a voice in the house. I still make the toast on the diagonal. I have no explanation for this. I have caught myself doing it maybe a dozen times, standing at that counter with a knife in my hand, cutting a piece of toast corner to corner for nobody, and every single time it takes the wind out of me. Last month I found her handwriting on the back of the water heater. She had written the installation date on it in 1999 in ballpoint pen, Diane 999, the way she labeled everything her whole life, and I sat down on the basement floor and stayed down there a while. And here is where I will leave it, because this is the part I actually think about. 2 weeks ago, my brother Gregory sent me a text message, the first contact in 9 months. He wrote that he is coming to Ohio in November for a conference in Columbus, and that if I am willing, he would like to drive out to Marysville and see the house, and that he would understand completely if the answer is no. That message has been sitting on my phone for 14 days. I have typed a reply 4 separate times and deleted it 4 separate times. Because the honest truth, the thing I have not said out loud to anybody, including Constance Whitaker, is that a very large part of me wants to say yes, not because I have forgiven him. I have not, and I do not know that I ever will. I want to say yes because I want somebody in the world who knew her to sit in that kitchen with me. And I do not know yet whether that is healing or whether that is exactly how it starts all over again. I still have not answered him.